Okay, fantastic. We'll get started now that the remaining people have joined in. So welcome to the Q3 2019 edition of the Small Business Risk Review. I'm Joseph Artuli. I'm the CTO here at CreditorWatch. Feel free to reach out to myself or the team on LinkedIn. We're always happy to stay in touch with our customers and any individuals that want to know a little bit more about CreditorWatch. So just some housekeeping rules before we get started. Please feel free to use the Q&A section. If you have any questions, feel free to write them throughout the entire presentation. However, we will try and get back to you in the next 24 hours. We've got a lot of content to get through. So if you've got anything, we'll send you a personalized email with any of the answers to any of your questions that you have. The session should be about just under 30 minutes, so we'll get you away to lunch as quickly as possible. There's quite a few new people that I can see that have joined in for this webinar. So just a little bit about CreditorWatch and who we are. We're Australia's leading and definitely the most innovative commercial credit reporting bureau in Australia with over 50,000 customers. It's getting close to 60,000 now. Our main products include our credit reporting, monitoring, alerting, and debt collection tools, obviously what we're pretty famous for in the market. DebtorLogic Plus, so analyzing companies' age trial balances. Some big news there over the next few weeks. We should be releasing a new version of DebtorLogic Plus that should make it easier and hopefully provide more insight into the data that you're uploading. Bankruptcy Plus, so provides access to obviously bankruptcy around individuals, receiving alerts around cross directorships. Apply Easy, our online crediting application and automation solution, so trying to remove as much paperwork that goes into onboarding your customers and providing credit. And finally, our most recent product, but it's now been a year now, PPSR Logic, so anything to do with uploading your PPS registrations to the government it's a great tool to be using. About the Small Business Risk Review, so obviously we do this on a quarterly basis where we aggregate all of our data that's been submitted and obtained through all the various sources to try and provide some insights and some trends into how each sector is performing. We collate information from the usual sort of government agencies, so ASIC, AFSA, which is the bankruptcy and PPSR, the ABR, courts around Australia, and some big news there as well. We've added the Supreme and District Courts of Queensland into that mix during this quarter, so some interesting news sources that we're constantly always trying to add. Insolvency notices, debt collection notices, which are unique to CreditorWatch, then the payment defaults and trade payment data, which is also unique to CreditorWatch. So just quickly before we begin, we always like to ask the question about how do you rate the conditions of the last quarter. Before we get into the data, we do like to see how each business considers their last quarter. Obviously, it's great to have some information that's unbiased by the data before we go into it. We've got some interesting insights during this quarter, so it'd be great to see everyone's responses. I'll just let that go for a few more seconds. So just sharing those results, you can see that about 30% of the individuals out there believe that they've had a really positive quarter, which is great news. A lot of people think that, so in that 50% bucket, think that the quarter's been pretty neutral, with about 20% thinking that the last quarter hasn't gone exactly according to plan. So that's based on that information, let's get into it. So just a comparison from court actions around Australia from the last Q3 to this Q3. Queensland court actions have been fairly similar to last to the last Q3, but what you'd see is a big increase there in terms of the dollar amount. This probably is a little bit skewed based on the fact that we have included the Supreme and District Courts, which tend to get quite large amounts pushing through, so that information there would slowly get adjusted over time. New South Wales courts has seen some really big increases, both in the dollar and the court and the number of court actions occurring, so 49% and 43%. Some great news for South Australia with it dropping 22% and 11% from Q3 2018. Victoria is staying fairly similar, and the WA court actions, while the number has stayed fairly similar, there's been a decent increase in the dollar amount. So going down to each state, you can see Queensland here, the number of court actions has increased quite dramatically. Again, the dollar figure has gone up by 444%. However, as mentioned earlier, this would probably be due to the additions of the District and Supreme Courts. So it's something that we'd like to see stabilize over the next few quarters. What's really important, I'd like to point out here, is the Q4, Q1, and Q2 of this year have generally seen trends going upwards, and I'll tie some other information later into that. You can see the same sort of trends here for New South Wales. Q4, Q1, and Q3 have always been on an upward trend, with Q3 of this financial year, this calendar year being 63% and 85%. So some big number increases there as well. South Australia, the dollar number has generally on average stayed the same. We've seen again another big increase in the number of court actions from the last quarter. And finally Victoria, which is nice to see kind of stabilizing. So nothing much has changed from the last quarter. So a small drop, 3% and 2% there in terms of dollar amounts. Western Australia have seen some big increase. So over the last few quarters, they tend to stabilize, but this quarter we've seen some really big increases, 52% and 21%. No doubt a lot of that would have to do with the mining sector. So later on we'll go through some industry insights, which has been a great addition over the last few small business risk reviews to try and tie in some of the reasons why we can see such a big jump here in Western Australia. As kind of mentioned before, the number of insolvencies that we've seen is starting to climb up again, and this is really typical. So we've seen some big increases over the last few quarters in court actions across all states, and it's not surprising now that we're starting to see the insolvency starting to increase. So you can see that on comparing just this quarter to last, we've seen 13% in the last quarter increase to go to 20% this quarter. And year on year, we can see that we're starting to make an upwards trend again. So generally what we're seeing is that when companies go through these court actions and we see so those numbers change, the effects of that generally doesn't happen for 3 to 6 months. So we're starting to see that increase now. On the Opposite side of the coin, though, we can see bankruptcies has dropped in comparison, about 24%, comparing Q3 of 2018 to Q3 of 2019. It's a very similar number as well in comparison to Q2 of 2019 to Q3 of 2019, about the 24% drop as well. Again, the biggest number of bankruptcies is occurring is in Queensland, followed closely by New South Wales and then Victoria. So the industry insights is generally where a lot of people start to get a lot of value from this data. Court actions has been on the rise, as you can see. A big chunk of those has been coming in from construction. So there's been a 40% increase from Q3 from Q2, sorry, to Q3, with professional and scientific and technical services following just at about 22% thereafter. Retail, manufacturing, wholesale trade are generally the ones that swap out. It's quite surprising actually to see wholesale trade come in to the top 5, but it's usually hovering around that 5 to 6 mark anyway. Insolvencies year on year, so we've seen some mining have a big jump, so 94% increase from this time last year. I think there's some big implications happening from the trade wars between China and the US affecting the industry. We've seen China's growth go from about 12% to 7% this year. So it's been a big change, and I have a feeling that's been a big part of the reason why mining has seen such a big jump over the last year. What's interesting as well is that in the mining sector, while they've had one of the most record-breaking growths in terms of actual dollar figure, in terms of exports, a lot of that as well is that companies from overseas are purchasing, and we're starting to see consolidation in the mining sector. Payment defaults year on year, again, not surprising given the number of court actions. Being in construction is where we see the biggest is also construction here, increasing to about 34%, with retail and manufacturing coming in the low 10 to 15 numbers. Again, with the Xero Small Business Insights review, we can see that the number of days on average for small business to be paid has dropped a little bit, about 5%, from about 35 days this time last year to about 32 days, which is great. However, we're still finding that small businesses are the ones getting really affected by this, by these late payments, and they're often offering discounts to big businesses to be able to pay on time, and that's really unfair at this stage. And we're hoping that the new government initiatives around how contracts are being accepted in terms of just paying for small businesses will really affect and drop that number dramatically. Some new information that we've added in here at this particular time is the payment times. So this is the average number of days that we see an invoice from being issued to the day it's been being paid. We can see the information, media and telecommunication sector has been the biggest change here. So it's going from about 8 days to 44. So it's a big jump in comparison to where it was last year of Q2. Mining, no doubt, because of the insolvency rate, has also been affected. Accommodation, food services, and education and training. When people think about information, media, and telecommunications, they might think about IT departments, but it's really about newspaper and internet publishing, TV and radio. So if you think about the broadcasters out there, along with some advertising, is in that bucket too. So it's been they've had some relatively small growth in comparison to the rest of the industries around Australia. So annually, about 7.1% growth in all industries, whereas we've only had about a 3 to 3.8% increase in that same sector. So you can see why that might start to indicate the payment times are starting to blow out a little bit there. Some interesting stats that we've never really added before, but it's been a great addition to the small business risk reviews. The payment defaults based on a quarterly year-by-year comparison. So generally, we haven't really added this information in because we've grown at such a rate, but we've grown at such a rate that the payment defaults have obviously always gone up. So we've normalized this data against the number of accounts that we've brought on board since that period, and we can see some really interesting trends. So Q4 of 2018 in comparison to Q4 of 2017, we saw about a 15% increase, 13% from Q1 of this year in comparison to last year, and you can see respectively Q2 and Q3 have also seen some pretty big jumps. So on the whole, we can see that the number of payment defaults that we're adding is growing quite a bit faster than the number of accounts that we're actually onboarding. So it's great news for our customers who have been with us for the last few years to see that information being shared and hopefully providing some better insights into how your customers are currently tracking. And so that's pretty much it today for our webinars. We've kept it pretty quick today, so just under 20 minutes. For anyone who's really interested in our upcoming webinars, please feel free to reach out. So on our website, creditorwatch.com.au/webinars. As always, today's resources will all be available and be sent to you. Any questions that you may have, feel free to email us at webinars or at admin@creditorwatch.com.au, and make sure you reach out to us on LinkedIn and have a read of our blog to find all this information. And just before we leave, just want to do a quick poll. We always want to know from our customers whether, and anyone else who may have attended, whether you found today's webinar useful. Fantastic. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. I hope you found some of the industry insights data extremely useful, and we can looking forward to seeing you in our next one.